All right, folks, if you could all take your seats. And now I want you all to welcome Hynek, who's going to be presenting about maintaining a Python project when it's not your job.
Thanks for coming, everyone. As we've just heard, I'm Hynek, and I maintain way too many open source projects. You may have heard of errors, which is the direct ancestor of the much beloved data classes in Python 3.7, which at this point has more than 12 million downloads per month, which is roughly 4x of Django. Also, I have still some stickers from last year left, so if you want, come and talk to me. Also, my second most popular project from is Trucklog, which is one of the two major structured logging packages for Python, the other one being Elliot, which is also great. This is much more hard to sell, but it is widely used in critical systems at this point. I've also been involved in many high-profile ones, like Twisted and CPython or PyOpenSSL. And I maintain a lot of less famous ones, which unfortunately are no less work-intensive in the long run. Now, despite this anxiety-inducing body of work, I am not saying that I'm a good maintainer. I'm also not saying that I'm a happy maintainer. Occasionally, I'm quite unhappy, and it does not spark any joy at all. And I tried to say thank you and bring it to goodwill, but nobody wanted them. So, I'm also sometimes really bad at it. So sometimes I just don't have time. So I have a crunch at work, I have to travel, or I want to travel. I have conference preparations. Like, you should see my GitHub inbox right now. Like, the month leading up to PyCon US is basically no maintenance whatsoever. And sometimes I do have time, but I don't have the energy to deal with all the bugs, pull requests, support requests, and whatnot. But I'm not here to talk about how shitty it is to maintain open source software. I think Russell made this point very well this morning. So he took that part from me. Instead, I want to give you some tools and approaches to feel less shitty about it and be less stressed while shipping a high-quality package out to the world. And to achieve that, I want you to remove friction. And when I say friction, I mainly mean for your contributors. Because as a maintainer, and this is important to realize, once your project is running, your main task that is specific to you as a maintainer is being a leader, being a product manager, a project manager. This is the only specific task for you. So you decide what goes into your project. You decide on the scope of your project. You are probably interested in upholding the quality of your project, because shipping buggy software is the best way to burn out by issue tracker. And I've seen some distressing hostilities on issue trackers because the maintainers were just so stressed out by the constant influx by negativity. And speaking of that, you also get to set the tone in your project. I think this is the biggest upside of maintaining projects, that you get to kick out toxic people before they become a problem, and before they start running the project, actually, because all the good people left because they didn't want to deal with it anymore. So in practice, of course, you will still write code. You will probably still write most of the code. But your goal should be to set up your project in a way that anybody could write code for it, even you. And this is important, because once your project matures, the development velocity goes down. This is just natural, and you're not going to hack on it every single day. So once you have to come back after weeks, months, to fix something, you'll be grateful for everything that you put into place before that helps you to hit the road running while contributing to your own project. And any friction for contributors also falls back on you more or less directly. So first, the most obvious thing, work does not get done. So how many of you ever ran into something that was a problem in a project you were using, you knew how to fix it, but you did not fix it because the process was just unclear or just not good? That's more hands than I expected. Right, so every hand that just went up stands for work that has not been done. It stands for work that has been done maybe by the maintainer, who could have done more maintainery things. So this is not good. And also, if every new contributor needs handholding to get started, to keep things running, the development environment and everything, these are menial tasks, even though we don't like to think about them like this. But support labor is labor, emotional labor is labor, and this kind of labor will burn out you much faster than writing code, in my experience. This is much, much worse to you. And I think Russell said something along those lines too. So what I'm saying is, if a willing contributor arrives, you want them to get started as easily as possible. They are not invested into your project yet. So you should give them an early feeling of success so they gain some confidence to continue. Otherwise, they just abandon ship. They should have a clear path from start to finish. And this is something I feel like many people get wrong. Contributors don't mind to put work into quality. I mean, it's most likely they have this project in production for themselves. So they have an intrinsic interest to keep it high quality. They don't want to get paged at 3 a.m. because something broke. But what's stopping people from contributing, or what's frustrating, is when it's not clear what to do. So a long but actionable and concrete to-do list is much better than a short one, but that is vague. That doesn't tell you what's expected of you. And finally, short feedback loops. Short feedback loops, which means basically the time between trying something out and seeing the result, is, in my opinion, the #1 factor in development ergonomics, because it encourages experimentation. It gives you this a feeling of security when you're playing around. And the lack of this is, to me, one of the #1 reasons to abandon work on something that is half finished, but it's just too tedious to bring it over the line. So in the following, I want to show you a bunch of ideas how I try to remove friction from contributing to my project. So I'm going to take you through the life cycle of a contribution here. And it's going to be a play in 3 acts, featuring you, who wants to contribute to a project of mine, and me, who wants to get it into the project and out to the people with as little work as possible. And ideally, and this is like the bonus round, I want to bind you to the project. I want you to do more work in the future because you liked it so much and because it was such a pleasant experience. So, unfortunately, the program committee refused me an all-day Hynek slot. So instead of 10 hours, I have meekly 45 minutes. So I'm mostly going to present concepts. But there's going to be, as always in my talks, a page at the end which shows the concrete implementations of those concepts. So if you find something interesting, there is a concrete example for that on this page. It also means absolutely no questions. We also started slightly late because of a friend of mine who talked too long. So yeah, this is gonna be fast and long. So we will start with your part, the development. This should be entirely about you. And if I have to intervene, I have failed both you and myself. So where do we start? You need the source code. And I still find it sometimes surprisingly hard to find the canonical place to find the source code of a project. So what I do is that in all my projects have a section like this, which is present in the GitHub README, on PyPI, and in the documentation. And it cross-references all those places with each other. So no matter how you find my project, you always find all other places where to work on it. And there's also this important part, which is encouragement. People still need to be encouraged a little bit to contribute to projects that they perceive as high value or high status. And since others somewhat is in that region, I feel it important to just make sure that people know that they are welcome. And I also link our contribution guide, which is a well-known file, which is called Contributing RST, or MD. And it gets linked prominently whenever someone opens a pull request. And this file should really encourage people even more to follow through, because again, many people think contributing to open source project is something only the enlightened elite can do. This is obviously rubbish, but take a sentence to dispel that notion. Then I find it important to describe the development process so people know if they fix something, what's going to happen next? How do I get this one character patch into a project? And then I like to explain expectations, like my code standards, because I'm quite picky about how my code looks, about the coverage, which should always be 100%, and of course about the behavior I expect from you and the behavior you can expect from me. So where I reference another well-known file, which is the code of conduct. And finally, maybe most importantly, I always give people a clear introduction to how to get a local development environment for the quick feedback loop I've been harping around. And so first off, I still use setup tools. I know there are alternatives. I know people have strong opinions about both setup tools and those alternatives. None of those alternatives cover all my needs, so for all its faults, I'm still on setup tools, and it's not that bad. So first, of course, create a virtual env however you want. There are great wrappers around. You don't have to do it by hand anymore. And then let's install the package as editable, which, yeah, people are laughing. This doesn't work right now in pip 19.1, but I'm sure we are going to get a new release soon. So editable installs are great because you get to install your source base as a package. And whenever you change something in the source code, the package magically changes along with it. This is different from just accidentally importing it from your path. Then I use an extra dependency called def. So who is familiar with this syntax? OK, this is less hands than I expected. So this is kind of cool. So these are optional dependencies. And you can also use them in your requirements.txt. You can have multiple of them. You just separate them by commas inside the brackets. And what you do here is that in your setup call, you pass a dictionary in, which maps names, like def, to a list of dependencies. It's really simple, but it is very useful, especially in cases like this. And since setup.py is Python code, you can build it incrementally. So I always have an optional extra called tests, which only contains dependencies for my tests, one called docs, which only contains the dependencies to build documentation, and def is all of the above. So I can run my tests and build my docs locally without any problems. So I think that unless you have C extensions or something like that, this should be all it takes to get a workable development environment in Python. Now, there are two problems. So first, you have to remember how to run the tests. And I think personally it always should be PyTest, because tests are code. And you probably have more lines of code in tests than you have lines of code of actual business code. And code needs to be maintained, so you should use the best tools available. I personally don't buy into this argument of purity of tests. If you have another tool which you like, be my guest, but just use the best tools available, because you're going to write a lot of tests. But still, I don't want you to remember my preferences about how to run tests. And this problem is sometimes solved using makefiles, especially by people coming from corporate backgrounds, because they have much more homogeneous environment. But this is not great for the reason alone that it's problematic on Windows. And as you may or may not, the vast majority of Python developers are on Windows. So if you did not know that, Steve Dower of Microsoft is giving a talk on this on the last day of the conference. He gave it before. It's really interesting. So the average user of your package may be someone very different from that what you think. Now, the second problem is that you are testing only one Python version, and you probably want to support more than one. And you could start creating your virtual envs with other Python versions, but fortunately, there is a solution for both of these problems. Of course, it's talks. Completely oversimplified, it allows you to declare virtual environments, optionally build your package, and install it into this virtual environment, and then run commands out of this virtual environment. I think it's also broken with pip 19.1. But I think they pushed that fix out already. So this is shown the easiest with an example, really quick. So you need a tox.ini in your project directory. First, you define the environments you want to have. In this case, it's Python 2.7, 3.7, PyPI, and PyPI 3. Next, you set global settings. In this case, we're going to say we want to install our package, which is the default, but we use the extras tests I've mentioned before, which is usually, in my case, PyTest, coverage, sometimes hypothesis, which is also very good. So next, we just run PyTest. And if you add this curly braces post-arcs thing at the end of the line, you can even pass arguments to this PyTest line. So this line will run PyTest in Python 2.7 with the argument -x. So technically, you can get away without having a local development environment at all if you have talks. And this really means that you just have to install talks and the Python interpreters you want to support to run the tests against all of your supported versions. And here I find it a valid expectation for most Python projects that I just can go into the project directory, type talks, and everything should be tested. So you should have really good reasons for this not to be the case. One of the reasons might be that you're using Nox, which I heard is also very good, which doesn't use this slightly hacky ini files and uses Python files instead. So there's, however, more to code quality than tests. There are issues of style, like consistency makes code easier to read. There is PEP8, of course, which comes to mind. And there are things that are not wrong, not terrible, but they're unfortunate, like unused variables or unused imports. It's fine, but it's confusing and it's also eating up memory. So the process of checking code without actually running it is called linting. It's like based on the stuff that you sometimes find in your pockets or in your belly buttons. It's nothing terrible, but life is kind of better without some crap in your belly button. So the most famous linter for Python, of course, is Flake8. And it combines multiple tools, PEP8 for style, and more importantly, PyFlakes for correctness. I'm going to go out on a limb and claim that code is usually of better quality if it passes Flake8. You can have like disagreements on the style, but it's definitely more readable and more correct. So next up, what is the single commit every Python project has that is using setup tools? It's fix manifest.in. But it turns out this loser only forgot to run his linters, because there is a tool for it, and it's even aptly named check manifest. And finally, have you ever seen a project page like this? It might be a little too small, but this means that PyPI was not able to render your long description because probably you had a syntax error or something like that in there. And I'm using this screenshot with permission, so thank you, Brian. And if you look closely, you will see that it is the test PyPI. And this is actually a good thing to know, because this is a great training ground when you're starting out with Python packaging and you just want to upload a package somewhere without breaking everyone's world. And of course, there is a linter for that. It's actually Twine, which is also the tool you should use to upload your packages. And yeah, that will check your packages to render correctly. Now, linting and checking is correct, is great. But what is even better than computers yelling at you that you're doing something wrong? It's making those stupid, expensive computers fix things for you. And it is when automatic formatters come into play. And I personally have found it to be game changers. Because once you embrace that you are not in control, you and your contributors can focus on the problem they are solving and not when to hit enter or what kind of quotes to use. And there's been a bunch of formatters for Python. None of them were just quite there until Black appeared, which is also the reason why everybody's late, because the maintainer of this fine project talked too long. I'm not bitter. So I forgive him because Black is amazing. Black formats your code into a canonical format that is deterministic, so it's just not fixing your problems. It will format the same code in the same format. I really like it. The second thing that's really nice is iSort, which has been around quite a while, actually. And it will sort your imports into beautiful sorted blocks, separated by type. So you're gonna have your block with standard library, third party, your own stuff. And together with Black, it's like 90% of code formatting is now automated. This is stuff that you don't have to think about. it's stuff that can't come up in code review because it's solved. This is great. It's much less attrition. So now we just have to make the user run all those linters, checkers, formatters, and whatnot. So some of them, like check manifest, you're going to have to put in talks because there's some packaging issues implied. But everything else, there is a better way. It's pre-commit. Pre-commit allows you to define hooks that run before each git commit. This is like the big picture thing. And if it fails, the git commit will abort. But it also allows you to run them over all of your files. And to use it, you just need a config file in your repository called precommit config.yaml. And surprisingly, Flake 8 has direct support. It's not surprising because the maintainer is now a maintainer of Flake 8 too, like precommit. And it's very straightforward. So you define a repo, you set a version which ensures that the Flake 8 update does not break the build, which used to happen in the past, and people got really mad about it. And I think this is a really good compromise to locking everything, because locking everything, especially when your project gets a little bit less active, leads to having a lot of pull requests just with updates to your dependencies, which is kind of annoying. So this is kind of cool. So then you choose a hook to run, and the Python version that is used for the hook. This is all you have to do, nothing else. Because pre-commit is Python aware. It will store and manage your hooks in their own virtual env, transparently. You don't have to know anything about it. It's somewhere in a cache directory. I don't even know exactly where it is. So using Black and isort is also very simple. And there is a whole ecosystem you may not have ever heard of. So who has ever checked in a PDB set trace? Don't be shy. I know it's more arms. Right. So there is a hook for us. And it's also not Python specific. You can even run a Docker container if you want. So it has a very wide support. With that all in place, I could now ask you to install pre-commit. But it's a Python package. I'm not going to ask you to install a Python package globally, because then my bug tracker would turn into a Python packaging support forum. And I'm saying this because it happened before. So what I do is that I wrap it into my dev extra I showed you before. So it gets installed into the virtual environment where you have your local development environment, which means that if you follow the instructions I've shown you before, you've got it. Once you can run tests and build your documentation, you can run pre-commit. So now I just have to ensure that you run it. Again, I could ask you to run pre-commit init, and it gets added as a Git hook, so you don't have to think about it. But still, I'm not going to rely on you remembering to do something, or me remembering to do something. So now I'm going to use talks. And in this case, we're going to add an environment called lint. The only dependency is pre-commit. And we don't need to install our package, which makes it much, much faster in operation. And then we just run all the hooks against all the files. And this is it. Your code is perfect. So, yeah. Come on, don't be so cynical. So, what is missing? Of course, documentation. How do we make sure documentation is building? You guessed it. Assuming it's Sphinx, which it should, because it's great. It's another Tox environment. This time, we install our extras called docs, which I talked before. We ensure that our docs build as HTML. And then we run the doc tests in our docs. And I really think that all your examples in your docs should be doc tests, because then you know that all your examples are actually correct. The only thing that's worse than no documentation is wrong documentation, lying documentation, because it's not just the absence of information. It's actually you are sending your users down the wrong path, and they will spend like an hour debugging their environments and questioning what they did wrong while you just made a typo somewhere. Consequently, if you have doc tests in your README, run them too. And now, by running talks, by typing 3 characters, we ensure that our tests are passing, the linters passing, the code and the imports are correctly formatted, documentation built and have working examples. And the only thing you have to remember is really to run talks. And everything I said before happened on your local machine. And I may not even know that you exist, and you already have a perfect patch for me, which is kind of cool. It also means that you can work anywhere. So I travel a lot, and sometimes I'm longing for conference Wi-Fis. Everybody who has ever used GitHub in rural Africa will understand what I mean here. Like, the current internet is broken for most of the world, and nobody of those responsible cares. But this is not just about my laziness, the consequences of colonialism, or anything like this. It's also about my insecurity. So I don't like to publish unfinished work, because I'm very self-conscious about everything I do. So I don't want to force you to publish half-finished work. So I give you the tools so you can ensure a high quality of your initial PR, and to give you confidence in your own work before you have to share it with the world. So now, you are done. Now you open a pull request. Now, if you look at your watch, we spend most of the time in Act 1. I told you I want to get involved as late as possible. And so far, we've automated most of the things, but certain things just cannot be automated. So enter another well-known file, in this case, pull request template, which allows you to add checklists to new pull requests. And I love checklists. Checklists are the reason why airplanes don't crash every day. Checklists are the reason why doctors wash their hands before cutting you open. They're like programs for humans, and they are the second best thing after actual automation. And fully rendered, it might look something like this, and you can use it to remind people to add documentation for new features, to add changelog entries, stuff like that. Now, at this point, me or a co-maintainer have to verify that you have done all these things. So of course, I'm going to use that list now too, because I don't know what I had today for lunch, so I'm not going to remember this. So while reviewing, I refer to this list, but I don't want to clone your fork on my computer to run the tests and checkers and whatever. This is also kind of operational security issues, like just running some random people's code on my computer. But there's more to that. So I want to encourage contributions through the web interface, because that's even less friction. This is like a very nice feature in GitHub that you can just edit files and open pull requests. And I feel like I'm getting most of the typo PRs through that. And I love typo PRs. Typos are super embarrassing when you see them. But do you really want to fork and git pull and everything and submit a PR? So this is kind of nice. But we need a way to run the tests on the internet. So we need continuous integration, or CI. And in the dark ages of open source, only the most prestigious project had their own CIs. Because the best case scenario was really that someone donated you a server, and then you had to run it yourself. That's not good. And I mean, is anyone here in open source to be a system operator? No. So, nobody. So then came Travis. And Travis had its ups and downs over the years, no question. But it arguably democratized the continuous integration scene in open source. Adding it to your project is so simple. You just copy and paste a bunch of YAML. It's like setup.py. You just copy it from other projects, and nobody can tell. You reuse the Tox environment, so you make sure the CI runs the same commands. And it's great. These are the good old times of 2018. Remember how young we were. Now, then came Idera. And I'm not going to comment on them specifically, mostly because I don't want to get sued. But I would like to encourage you to do your own research on this company, how it conducts its business, and how other companies they're taking over are doing right now. But here's the fact. Shortly after taking over Travis, they laid off a big part of their workforce. So I'm going to say that it's kind of a red flag. And it made what was supposed to be one slide telling you to just use Travis and maybe AppWare if you need to build Windows binaries, an unexpected research project, one that I did not enjoy, and one that also didn't give me great results. Because unfortunately, every other option is way more complex than Travis. or is lacking in some other way. So all my projects are still on Travis, but I hope to get them off there better later than sooner than later, because I consider Travis a time bomb at this point, and I'm sure that the free offer of them is running on borrowed time, which is sad. It cannot be overstated how influential Travis was to raise the bar of open source quality. But so if you meet any former or current Travis employees, I would like to encourage you to let them know how important their work was and is to you, because this is a very hard time for them too, like seeing their own legacy unwinded. I'm sure they will appreciate it. Nevertheless, good things are happening. I think it's good that we have an end of our monoculture, because Travis was dominating really hard. Azure Pipelines is probably the biggest contender right now, but it's really complex. On the other hand, the Microsoft booth will help you to migrate to Azure Pipelines. So just form an orderly line, and let's see how fast they can work off this room. Also, GitHub is working on a CI too, called GitHub Actions. Unfortunately, it has been in private beta for months. I've been waiting for a month to get access to the private beta, so I would not hold my breath for it to land anytime soon. However, GitHub does offer some ways to automate, most notably GitHub Checks, which is just a way for third-party services to add a little red X next to your pull request to tell you something is missing. The most common one is, of course, CI integration, but also checks based on data from CI. For example, code cough can make your pull request fail if there's not enough code coverage. And there's more sophisticated or artisanal, if you will, way of automation, which are GitHub bots. And Mariata, the Khaleesi of CPython core development bots, gave a talk on them this morning, and I would like to encourage you all to watch the video, because she did change core development forever with what she has done with the bots. There's so much menial task you had to do as a core developer day to day before. Now, so much for the mechanical parts of the PR process. So what happens after all checks pass, all the robots are happy? Someone has to review it. In the beginning, it's you, but as the project grows, you don't want to review everything yourself. You probably can't review everything yourself. GitHub even acknowledges that with the code owners file that allows you to map paths to contributors. You also don't want to triage all bugs, answer all questions. Like, your time is limited, especially if it's your free time. So what this means is you need to build a community. And community building is really hard. There's lots of material out there. I can't really say much new things, but I would like to talk a bit about community empowerment here. And I think it's important to give your contributors the feeling that the project is theirs too. And I think it's really shitty to let others do the work, to build your brand for nothing in return. I think contributors should be celebrated, and I'm trying to do this as well as I can. Taking all the fame for yourself for work that you maybe have done, but others too, it feels good on a short term, no question. You get to retweet all the praise to how awesome you are in your project, but it will backfire eventually. People burn out if they don't feel valued, and I've seen some people get very resentful about this treatment they received. So in my case, once adders grew beyond a certain size, and a lot of the code was from other contributors, like most notably all the typing code, I still don't understand it, to be honest. I felt bad to make it look like it's all my work. There was still my name on GitHub. And there's also practical reasons. There's a lot of functionality missing from personal projects that you get in organizational projects, so, which I really came to appreciate. So I moved adders into a GitHub organization, and anyone who contributed to the project can have full access. Now it's our project. And also, if it's less obvious that the project is yours, people are much less likely to add you on Twitter and tell you that your free labor is ruining their lives. Just a little life hack here. So how do you decide, though, whom to take in, whom to give special privileges on your project? My suggestion is just don't make a big deal out of it. My friend Corey Benfield, whom we tragically lost to a fruit company, basically told me that, and PyPI does the same thing. If someone wants commit rights on your project, just give it to them. Like, what can happen on a Git project? As long as you protect your master branch, as long as you force everyone, including yourself, through pull requests, there's nothing you cannot revert what they could do. And once the process is clear, people will adhere to it, and if not, revert the work, kick them off the team. But it never happened to me, Corey, or PyPI. People tend to respect code. Things that happen much more often is that you have to kick people off mailing lists and stuff like that, because, yeah, that's a much more common occurrence. So finally, providing support can be also quite stressful, especially on synchronous channels like IRC or, God forbid, Slack. So I started moving my support to Stack Overflow. And this has multiple advantages. So first of all, it's asynchronous. So people in San Francisco can ask, and I answer whenever I'm awake in Berlin, if someone didn't beat me to it. It's searchable, so my answers don't get lost in some weird archive. So I don't have to answer the same question multiple times. It's now the problem of Stack Overflow's moderators, which is great. I don't also want to spend my all day on the page, though, because, like, on the web page, I wouldn't help myself much. It's just a different medium. So I have set up tags for all my projects. And then I follow them on RSS. RSS, yes. You may have heard of it, like grandma talking about fondly. It's like Instagram, but there's no stories. It's not just photos, and also you can choose your own client to follow it. You should really try it. So, only downside, you will need someone with enough reputation to create tags, because this is gated behind, I think, 1,500 points or something. I'm not one of those people yet, but we have plenty of people who can do that for you. But back to our pull request. Let's assume I had to review it. While doing so, I didn't have to pester you about the line length, about the import order, about the type of quotes to use, about trailing commas, about not trailing commas, about failing tests, about broken documentation, about broken examples in documentation. Robots got to be the assholes. And studies have shown that people take pestering from a robot much less personal, and who doesn't like an asshole robot? So, merge it. We are done. And as a maintainer, I really want to ask you to say thank you to your contributors. I've been on both sides of this equation, and I find it weirdly brusque and rude if someone just merges my contributions and doesn't say a word about it. It's just human decency. Anyhow, for everyone to use your great new feature, or not being pestered with the bug you just fixed, we have to get it out of the world. So it's time for the third and final act, the release. And what I hope you realize here is that if you follow Act 1 and 2, you can release anytime. Because your pull request-based workflow with CI will make sure that your master branch is always green, always ready to release. This is not only convenient, it's also essential if you have an emergency like a nasty bug or even security problems. However, a project that is ready to be released anytime, but is not, because the release process is such a drag that you procrastinate on it, it's kind of worthless. And this leads to the bug reports we've all seen, like, oh my God, the last release has been so long time ago, when are you gonna finally do something about it? You don't want that. What you want is to fully automate this whole process. And if you look at it, releasing a package to PyPI, it's basically just a matter of replacing a bunch of strings, running a bunch of commands, and double-checking a bunch of outputs. You just have to pick where you want to let the CI do your release, which is increasingly popular. The Hypothesis project, which I mentioned before, takes this to 11, because whenever they merge a pull request, they automatically build a new release and push it out to PyPI. So they have a lot of releases. I personally prefer local automation because I want more control, and I also like to centralize my tools around my projects. So I'm not going to talk about CI at all, but there's going to be a talk tomorrow by Chris Wilcox, actually. So if you're interested in that, you should visit him. So, yeah, I should just ask for the first slot in a conference and then just start sending people for fill in my gaps. It's very convenient. So, since I maintain many, many projects, and let me tell you one thing, projects tend to multiply once you embrace the glamorous open source lifestyle. I want to avoid duplication of code and knowledge. And this is why I rely on conventions that I can enforce because I'm in control of my project. And because I can rely on conventions, I only need one release script for all of my projects, and it's really convenient. So let's talk really quick about conventions. So all of my projects have this block in their main dunder init py, and most of it is actually Python conventions. What's for me is this thing. I mean, it's not just me, but it's something I like. So when I'm in development, I'm having the next version with a .dev0 suffix to make clear that it's not the last version anymore, and it's not the next version yet. I find it very confusing when projects either bump too early or bump too late, and you don't really know where you are with the code that you are looking at. When I release, I just have to strip the little suffix at the end, and the code is ready. It's nice. So this is the canonical metadata for my package, and I find it makes sense to have it in the code. The code is the canon, and everything else just derives from it. So my Sphinx docs load this file and extract the version. My setup.py reads this file and uses a very simple regular expression to just get out all these fields and then pass it into the setup call. If you use alternative builders like, I don't know, Flit or Poetry, you will have to do more work yourself, I'm afraid. Like Flit will use the dunder version thing, which is really nice, a standard we can agree on. The Poetry issue tracker, it was notably not Sebastian himself, but they told me that I should just ship my pyproject.toml and parse it at runtime, which I don't know about you, but I don't think it's okay to parse files as an import side effect of your main package. If you're going to waste computing power like this, you better get a Bitcoin out of it. So I hope better methods will emerge over time, but right now it's not great. So what else changes in a release? The changelog. You'll want to add today's date, the date of your release. Please add the release date. Changelogs without the dates are very, very not nice. And also, please use the only format everybody can read. Even me, even us, who traded freedom for Kinder Surprise Eggs and universal healthcare. Our lives are hard enough, don't make it any harder. So, for me, this means just replacing the word unreleased with the current date in my changelog.rst in my project directory. These are 3 lines of code. You can push it into 1 line, I'm sure. Technically, the project is ready for release. I mean, the version is correct, the changelog is ready, you can go for it. There's one thing I like to do, though, is to check all the links in my documentation, like for 404s or moved content. And if you're using Sphinx, this is super easy. There's a makefile target called make link check, or if you're on Windows, you use the script they ship, make.bat link check, and it will build all your docs, and it will check all the links it finds there. I do not recommend it making this part of your CI, because there are way too many transient failures over the time. Like, for example, last time the US government shut down, a bunch of HTTPS certificates expired, and a lot of CIs broke. So maybe do it just before releases. But here we are ready to ship. And actual shipping thing is just a few simple steps. I wrote a blog post about it if you're interested, but it's just about committing the changes, tag your version, so reader docs can knows that it's a new release, build the package, push it to PyPI using the Twine tool, and you're done. That's all. Congratulations, your contribution is on PyPI. I didn't have to do that much, because everything I've just mentioned is, and more actually, is completely automated. And I'm sure that everyone in this room can write a script that does everything I just said in Act 3. It might look trivial, and it might feel like a waste of time to automate these simple things. But especially the trivial stuff adds up, and it will save your time and frustrations and complaints about the lack of releases. So I'm afraid this is what I do. There's so much more stuff I would like to talk about, like how to handle coverage locally and in CI, how to manage change logs using tools like Towncrier. I had to kill almost 20 slides, I'm not lying, like 20 slides, just about documentation and how to, and my eternal love for read the docs. I had an entire rant about how 79 characters are the only true line length. I had an essay on how to prevent packaging mishaps like empty source disks on PyPI, newsflash, use an SRC directory, and I had a whole TED talk about semantic versioning being well-intentioned, ultimately fundamentally flawed. But alas, the schedule is a cruel mistress. All of this I just mentioned is on the page. I'm just going to link. So I hope that everyone could take something from here. And of course, most of what I said is relevant even if that project is your job. I use all the tools I've just mentioned on my own project that I get paid for. And you should automate as much as possible. You should have standardized build and release scripts. You should document your processes for yourself and for your coworkers. And you should invest in short feedback loops because they pay off no matter whether you get paid or not. So this is all I had for you today. I would like to, especially this time, check out the talk page. It got really long. But everything I hand-waved over, you can see there for real in action. And of course, the usual stuff, follow me on Twitter, get your domains from Variomedia. If you speak German, have an excellent PyCon, feel free to chat me up about anything of that. Please remember, tomorrow is a maintainer summit, so there might be a lot of possibilities to exchange about this kind of stuff. So I'm Hynek, thank you very much.